She learned slowly, not in fire but in silence, how to walk away without noise. You see, wisdom rarely comes in thunder, it arrives quietly through 1,000 small betrayals. A wise woman is not born, she is sculpted by disappointment. And as she matures, she doesn't raise her voice, she raises her standards. The first to go are the ones who drain her spirit. Not always cruel, not always obvious. They might wear smiles, ask questions, pretend concern. But she feels it, the heaviness after every conversation, the exhaustion after every visit. These are the ones who feed off her energy and give nothing in return. And while she once tried to fix them, love them, carry them, she now understands, you don't owe your light to those who live in shadows and choose to stay there. Next are the ones who disrespect her boundaries. She has drawn lines, not walls, but gentle, intentional lines. Yet there are people who treat those boundaries like suggestions, not commands. They show up uninvited, demand her time, touch her life with hands that haven't asked for permission. But she's no longer afraid to be called cold. She's learned that peace costs clarity, and clarity demands distance. Then come the manipulators, the guilt givers, the ones who package obligation in affection. After all I've done for you, they say, forgetting that love is not a ledger. They don't yell, no, they sigh, they withdraw, they sulk, they hope she will chase after them, apologize for breathing. But the wise woman no longer plays that game. She has learned that love born of guilt is not love at all, it's prison. There are also the silent saboteurs, the envious ones. They smile in public, but go quiet when she wins. They clap, but their hands are hollow. These are not enemies, they are masked friends. And while she used to feel confused by their detachment, now she recognizes the pattern. Growth exposes envy, and she will not shrink to comfort the insecure. She chooses to shine, even if it blinds. Finally, she leaves behind the ones who bring chaos. Ah, how once she mistook chaos for chemistry. How she believed the storm was romantic, the unpredictability, a kind of passion. But she's older now, wiser. She knows that confusion is not a love language, that peace is not boring, it is beautiful. She no longer walks into rooms filled with fire, hoping to be the extinguisher. She lets the fire burn alone. You must understand, a wise woman does not cut people off in anger. She does so in awareness. She no longer begs to be seen, heard, or respected. She simply observes, decides, and moves, and it is this stillness, this precise, graceful exit, that makes her powerful. She walks away without a monologue. There are no final texts, no last-ditch explanations, because wisdom is quiet. It doesn't seek validation. It seeks freedom, and what many call cold, she knows is simply self-respect. You don't have to scream to be firm. You don't have to hate to let go. Sometimes love is releasing, not clinging, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to heal people who don't want to be whole. She has learned that everyone cannot come with her, that some people are chapters, others are footnotes, a few are lessons dressed as love, and all of them, yes, all of them, shaped her. She cuts people off not because she lacks compassion, but because she finally has it for herself. She knows her energy is sacred, her time precious, her peace non-negotiable, and so the wise woman walks forward, not bitter, not broken, just, selective, guarded, yes, but open, not to chaos, not to guilt, not to envy, but to love that is calm, kind, and clean. She isn't waiting for apologies anymore. She doesn't need closure. Her healing is not dependent on others. It is anchored in truth, and her truth is this: not everyone deserves a seat at her table, and that's not cruelty. That's clarity, and perhaps, above all else, she has learned to listen, not to others, but to herself, to the inner whisper that once pleaded and now commands, protect your peace, choose your circle, honor your soul. Some people don't storm in like hurricanes. They seep in like fog, quiet, subtle, consuming. They come bearing smiles, kind words, soft intentions, but they leave behind a strange fatigue, a kind of emotional jet lag. You speak to them, and somehow your joy becomes diluted, your mind heavy, your day slower, and you begin to understand that not all damage is loud. A wise woman learns to notice this, not with anger, but with precision. She senses when her energy is being siphoned, not stolen, when her light dims after every encounter. It's not about what they say. It's what she feels when the conversation ends. She doesn't need proof. Her body becomes the evidence. There are those who love to linger in your orbit, not to grow, but to stay warm by the fire of your spirit. They are not evil, not malicious, but they are empty, and empty vessels don't fill others. They only absorb. She used to think compassion meant endurance, that love meant staying, that being kind meant being constantly available. But there came a moment, gradual as the setting sun, when she realized energy is currency. And some keep asking for change without ever bringing their own. It's never a single moment. It's not one fight, not one betrayal. It's cumulative, a slow, rip erosion of vitality. She wakes up one day and realizes she's been tired for months, emotionally bankrupt, running on the fumes of obligation. The draining ones often mask themselves as the harmless ones. They don't argue. They don't demand, but they call and need and need. Their presence is passive but persistent. Their absence never noticed, their presence somehow exhausting. She used to feel guilty for noticing. As though awareness was cruelty, she would question herself, maybe I'm too sensitive. But over time, sensitivity turned into sensitivity to truth, and the truth whispered what words never did: you are being depleted. It is in the quiet moments, after a phone call, after a gathering, where the wisdom lands. If she has to lie still for hours afterward to recover, then it was never a conversation. It was extraction. She notices how they never ask how she's doing in a way that invites listening. How they pivot the dialogue always back to their chaos, their struggle, their drama. It's a loop, a wheel of woe, and she's the one constantly pushing it uphill. Empathy without boundaries becomes a weapon turned inward. She learned this not through books, not through speeches, but through aching, wordless fatigue. A soul tiredness that told her something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. So she began to observe quietly, carefully, without confrontation, not to expose them, but to understand herself. Every yawn, every sigh, every heaviness after interacting became data. She was studying the cost of connection. Some of them were friends. Some were even family. And that made the cutting harder. Because what do you do when the very people you love are the ones depleting your life force? She doesn't hate them. She doesn't blame them. She just reduces the volume, the frequency, the access, like a radio station turned down until it becomes a whisper, not gone, just distant enough not to consume. There is no grand goodbye, no argument, no slammed door. There's only the slow, graceful redirection of energy back toward herself, a reclaiming, and the emptiness they leave behind is not a void, it is relief, a space where her soul can breathe without being harvested by those who never intended to give, only to take. There are people who do not understand the meaning of the word no, not because they are deaf, but because they choose to hear only what serves them. When she says, I need space, they hear, try harder. When she says, I'm not available, they hear, convince me. Her words are not boundaries to them, they are obstacles to be maneuvered. The wise woman learns through many internal wars that boundaries are not for others, they are for herself. They are not fences to keep the world out. They are doorways with locks that remind her she decides who may enter and who must stay outside. In her younger years, she mistook boundary, setting as cruelty. She was taught to be agreeable, accommodating, pleasing. But as life bruised her spirit and softened her ego, she realized self-preservation is not selfishness, it is survival. There are those who press and push in subtle ways. They don't force their way in through violence. They do it through charm, through persistence, through guilt. You've changed. They say, when she starts honoring her space, you're not the same. They insist, not realizing that growth is not betrayal. She begins to recognize the patterns, the ones who only show up when they need something, the ones who override her no with another ask, the ones who act as though her time is their entitlement, and she doesn't explode. She simply begins to close the gates. There's a sacredness in solitude, in choosing who gets to witness her silence, who gets access to her late night thoughts, her laughter, her vulnerabilities, and when someone keeps barging in, uninvited, with muddy shoes and loud voices, she no longer apologizes for removing the welcome sign. They will call her difficult, aloof, too guarded, but she no longer bends to the names given by those who benefited from her lack of boundaries. She has learned that saying no, without explanation, is not rude, it is powerful. That she owes no one her constant availability, that her presence is a privilege, not a punishment for someone else's loneliness. They test her, of course, some with tears, others with accusations, but she does not negotiate with people who see her boundaries as personal offenses. Her spirit is not open range, and there is a calm that comes with it, not at first. At first there is guilt, doubt, loneliness, but in time she sees how much more of herself she retains, how much more energy she has, how much more peace there is in not constantly being occupied by people who think affection is persistence. She begins to enjoy saying no, not out of spite, but out of self-trust. Each time she does, she reclaims a part of herself that was once leased to others. And slowly she becomes whole again. The ones who respected her only when she was convenient begin to fall away, naturally, quietly, without conflict. Like leaves in autumn, they detach when the season no longer serves them. And she lets them. She doesn't fight for the ones who argue with her limits, because love, in its truest form, recognizes the shape of her soul and moves with grace around it. There are people who wear friendly faces but harbor silent wishes. They smile when she stumbles, they clap when she falls short, not with their hands, but in the shadowed corners of their hearts, where envy and bitterness fester like mold behind painted walls. A wise woman learns to read beyond words. She studies energy, tone, timing. She remembers who disappears when she succeeds, and who suddenly appears when life becomes difficult. It's not always what they say. It's the silence in moments that demand support. They don't need to mock her aloud. They just don't cheer when she rises. They withhold warmth when she's glowing. Their support is conditional, strategic. They prefer her when she's doubtful, humble, in need of reassurance. Because in her weakness, they feel taller. At first, she thinks she's imagining it, that surely no one would root for her downfall while wearing the badge of friendship. But patterns speak louder than words. And repeated absence in her moments of glory becomes its own language. They're the ones who rush to console, but never to congratulate. The ones who offer shoulders, but never hands to lift, who are present in storms, but vanish in sunlight. She begins to see the truth. Some people are only comfortable when she is beneath them. Her success makes them uncomfortable, not because she brags, but because it reflects their own stillness. Her movement exposes their stagnation. Her healing reminds them of wounds they've ignored, and rather than confront their reflection, they resent her for shining. She begins to test the waters, shares good news cautiously, observes their eyes. Their posture, the delay in their enthusiasm, and it confirms what her soul already knew. Not everyone is happy when she's happy, but she doesn't confront them, she doesn't accuse, she simply withdraws. Not to punish, but to protect. Her growth deserves to be celebrated, not tolerated. Her joy, sacred and hard-earned, belongs in the company of those who dance with her, not those who disguise discomfort as indifference. She no longer seeks validation from them. She no longer adjusts her light to keep them comfortable. If her radiance unsettles them, so be it. She didn't come this far to dim herself into their approval. There's a quiet pain in realizing some people only loved you broken, that their loyalty was to your lesser self, But there's also liberation, because once she sees it, she can choose differently. She doesn't need applause. She doesn't crave noise, but she does demand honesty, and anyone who cannot stand next to her when she's winning has no place beside her when she's rebuilding. The ones who celebrate her failure never say it aloud. But their absence in her success is deafening. It is in the lack of texts, the delayed replies, the way they speak of her achievements with faint praise or shifting topics. She sees it, all of it, and instead of mourning their absence, she honors her own clarity. She understands now that not every friendship is rooted in love. Some are rooted in comparison, and comparison cannot sustain genuine connection. So she surrounds herself with those who cheer when she climbs, who push her upward not to follow, but because they want her to rise. And the others, the watchers, the quiet celebrants of her pain, she leaves them where they chose to stand. Behind her, there's a stillness that is not peace, it is decay. A kind of spiritual sleepwalking. Some people live entire decades in the same loop, speaking the same lines, making the same choices, defending the same pain, not out of helplessness, but out of unwillingness. The wise woman doesn't expect perfection, but she values progress. She understands that we're all wounded, but we're not meant to build homes inside our wounds. Pain may be a teacher, but some people treat it like a residence. And that she cannot walk beside. They complain, but never act. They suffer, but never seek help. They speak of dreams, but never lift a finger, and every conversation becomes a circle, repeating history with new names, new dates, but the same ending. She used to stay. She thought she could inspire change by example, that if she loved them loudly enough, they would awaken. But there comes a point when she realizes, dragging someone through growth is not love. It's self-abandonment. These are the ones who scoff at change, who mock ambition, who belittle self-work. They call it fake, performative, a phase, not because it is, but because it challenges their inertia. She notices how conversations stagnate, how curiosity dies, how everything becomes gossip or complaints. There's no depth, no exploration, just repetition, and it begins to suffocate her. Growth demands friction. Expansion requires discomfort, but these souls, they want ease, familiarity, comfort, even if that comfort is born of dysfunction, and she begins to feel the weight of their chosen immobility pressing down on her. They do not want her to grow, not because they're cruel, but because her growth reminds them of their refusal. And rather than face their own stalling, they mock the journey of others. She sees the resistance in their eyes when she speaks of healing, the boredom in their tone when she shares insight, and slowly her spirit recoils, not in judgment, but in preservation, because growth cannot be sustained in dead soil, and she refuses to plant dreams where nothing is nurtured. It becomes too costly, too lonely, even in their presence. The most painful realization is not that they won't grow, it's that they don't want to. They are not waiting for a miracle, they are comfortable in their chaos. And she's been shrinking herself to stay beside them. She begins to outgrow the conversations, the routines, the silence that used to feel like comfort now feels like a cage, and with every step forward, their presence tugs at her heels, begging her to return to who she was. But she doesn't belong there anymore. She honors her past, but she refuses to relive it. And if they won't walk with her, she walks alone. She doesn't force it. She doesn't plead. She lets them be, because some people are not meant to come with you. They are meant to teach you the cost of standing still. Guilt is a subtle chain. It doesn't clang like metal, it whispers. It says, if you loved me, you'd do this. It twists kindness into obligation. It cloaks manipulation in the robes of care, and it is often wielded by those who fear losing control. The wise woman knows the language of guilt. She was once fluent in it, trained to say yes when she wanted to say no. Raised to put others first, even if it bled her dry, but wisdom doesn't come cheap. It comes through the painful awakening that love and guilt should never hold hands. There are those who use their sadness like a lever, who cry not from pain but to maintain power, who act fragile not to seek help but to demand submission, and she begins to see that not every tear is truth. They say, "You've changed." They say, "I guess you're too busy now." They say, "You don't care like you used to." And it wraps around her like a noose, but this time she doesn't tighten it. She begins to untie it. She used to cave, to explain, to apologize for growing, but now she watches. She sees the pattern, how they appear only when she says no, how they only speak of pain when she asserts boundaries. Guilt is not a guide, it is a trap, and she learns to hear its tone. It never asks, it accuses, it never respects, it corners, and she decides she will no longer live in the house of someone else's emotional weather. Their sadness is not a debt, their expectations are not a command. She can care and still say no. She can love and still walk away. She can feel empathy without surrendering sovereignty. They will twist it. They will say she is cold, that she has hardened, but they mistake clarity for cruelty. She has not become unkind. She has become self-honoring. She doesn't cut them off with rage. She lets the distance grow organically. A missed call, an unanswered text, a silence where once there was performance, and slowly the grip of guilt loosens. In its place, she feels something new, peace. The peace of not being emotionally extorted. The peace of choosing herself without apology. She doesn't wish them harm. She simply wishes herself freedom, and that freedom can only live where guilt does not. Their sadness is theirs to manage. Her boundaries are hers to maintain. And she is no longer responsible for balancing both. What they call selfishness is simply self-return, and she walks it now, not out of rebellion, but out of remembering who she was before guilt taught her to forget. She does not carry scissors in her hands, she carries them in her spirit. The cuts she makes are not violent, they are not loud. They happen in quiet rooms, after too many chances, after sleepless nights spent replaying conversations that never should have needed decoding. A wise woman doesn't cut to harm, she cuts to heal. Her solitude is not empty, it is earned. It is not lonely, it is sacred, because before she learned to let go, she had to live through holding on far too long. She had to exhaust herself in the effort of keeping people who never intended to stay, never intended to grow, never intended to love without condition. And now she understands. She understands that peace often comes dressed in disappointment. That clarity often arrives when illusions fall away. The moment she stops defending the people who drained her, she begins to find strength she forgot she had. It's not the letting go that hurts, it's realizing how much she was tolerating. A wise woman isn't cruel. She simply refuses to negotiate with chaos. She no longer explains herself to the unchanging. She no longer proves herself to the ungrateful. She doesn't need applause, doesn't need agreement. She only needs alignment, and when something no longer aligns, she walks. This wisdom didn't come easily. It came in chapters soaked in tears. It came from forgiving too much, staying too long, hoping too hard. But pain, when it's respected, transforms, and she used hers like a chisel, shaping a life that fits her soul instead of her wounds. The 5 she cut off each left a lesson. The one who constantly drained her taught her about energy. The one who wore a mask showed her the cost of illusion. The one who celebrated her failure taught her to see beyond smiles. The one who refused to grow showed her what decay looks like. And the one who manipulated her with guilt taught her the priceless value of boundaries. She doesn't hate them. That's not her way. Hate is too heavy, and she has walked too far to carry it. But she also doesn't invite them back. Wisdom is not forgetting. It's remembering differently. She remembers now without longing. She remembers now without blame. She remembers, and that is enough. She has learned to listen to herself louder than she listens to others. Her intuition, once drowned beneath people, pleasing and fear, is now her compass. And it whispers to her in quiet moments, "This is peace, protect it." She no longer sees cutting people off as cruelty. She sees it as gardening. Some weeds disguise themselves as flowers, but they choke the life out of the roots. And she is no longer ashamed to pull them. She knows what blooms when she makes space. Her circle is smaller now, quieter, but far more beautiful. The people in her life reflect who she is becoming, not who she used to be. And that is the true measure of wisdom, not who you attract in your pain, but who remains as you heal. She no longer apologizes for needing air, for needing room to grow, for needing people who pour as much as they take. She doesn't see that as selfish. She sees that as sacred. A wise woman doesn't just nurture others, she nurtures herself. There was a time she feared being misunderstood. Now she fears misunderstanding herself. She walks away not for drama, but for clarity. She leaves not because she's cold, but because she's warm, and she refuses to keep burning for those who offer no light in return. This is not about ego, it is about equilibrium. It is about coming back to center, and every cut she made was a return to her own alignment. The further she walks from chaos, the closer she comes to peace, and she has learned, finally, that love does not require sacrifice of self. That real relationships do not demand abandonment of truth, that worth is not measured by endurance, but by alignment, and now she chooses herself, fully, deeply, without guilt. She is not bitter, she is not broken. She is awake, awake to what drains her, awake to what fills her, awake to the quiet power of letting go, not with resentment, but with reverence, because the wisest cuts are not made in anger, they are made in honor of the life she is now choosing to live.